He was a millionaire CEO, known for his silence in the boardroom and dominance in the market, until one quiet evening at a downtown restaurant, a little girl walked up to his table and slipped him a napkin. What she wrote changed everything. What could a child possibly say to make a man cry in public? Why did he walk away from a billion-dollar empire after reading those 7 words? And how could a napkin become the key to a forgotten past, a buried grief, and a second chance at fatherhood? This is a story of Grayson Kalea man defined by logic, undone by love and Nora, a little girl with stars in her sketchbook and a truth no one expected. It's about what happens when the people we walk away from find their way back to us in the most unexpected form. If you believe in the quiet strength of love, the redemption found in unlikely places, and the beauty of choosing presence over power, then this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin the journey. The soft clink of crystal glasses and murmurs of polite ambition filled the private dining suite of Lumiere, Boston's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. Grayson Cole sat at the head of the long table, his posture effortless, his charcoal gray suit pressed to perfection. Around him, venture partners from Zurich and Singapore exchanged guarded smiles, reading each other between sips of wine and seafood courses they couldn't pronounce. Grayson tapped his thumb lightly against his glass. Not out of impatience, but rhythm. It was a habit he'd picked up long ago back when he still composed music in college, before Colvest Capital, before luxury skyscrapers, offshore accounts, and 15-minute calendar blocks defined his identity. Before silence became something to fear, his assistant had triple-checked every detail tonight: the imported Riesling, the sea bass flown in fresh, the view, the lighting, everything. And yet, Grayson felt absent. He heard them speaking: metrics, merger alignment, asset rotation. The words skimmed across his thoughts like stones on a pond. He wasn't bored, he was distant. Until the waiter, a boy not older than 20, came to clear the appetizer plate and pause just for a moment too long. Underneath Grayson's plate was a folded napkin, cream-colored, with handwriting peeking out in blue ink. Not the calligraphic swirl of the restaurant's branding. No, this was different. Grayson frowned. He waited until the conversation shifted toward someone else's quarterly report before discreetly unfolding the napkin beneath the table. The handwriting was uneven, a child's, slanted letters, misspelled words, but legible. My name is Nora. My mom said you're my dad. Please come. Grandma is really sick. She says it might be too late. We're at Maplewood Center. He stopped breathing. The buzz of the room faded into a hum, and then silence. Nora. He read it again. The name meant nothing, and yet his chest tightened with a strange, hollow pressure. Maplewood Center. He vaguely recognized the name. A shelter. A halfway house. He wasn't sure. The last time he'd even spoken the word family out loud had been years ago, probably when his legal team settled his cousin's inheritance dispute. But this wasn't business. This wasn't transactional. This was personal, and it shouldn't be. He folded the napkin once, then again, slipped it inside his inner coat pocket. Mr. Cole. A partner leaned in. Your thoughts on the Marina Point asset realignment? Grayson cleared his throat. Excuse me, he said, pushing back his chair with a calmness he didn't feel. A family emergency. I'll follow up with my team in the morning. No one questioned him. No one ever did. Outside, the night was brisk. Early fall in Boston had that sharp bite to the wind that hinted winter wasn't far behind. His driver opened the car door, but Grayson waved him off. "I'll take the wheel." Sir Grayson didn't answer. He slid into the driver's seat of his own Bentley, a car he rarely drove himself, and pulled out onto the street with calculated control. He didn't turn on the GPS. He didn't need directions. Somewhere between the silence of the leather interior and the hum of the engine, a name floated up from a buried corner of memory. Eliza, a name he hadn't said aloud in nearly a decade. She was an artist, an idealist, the last woman who had ever made him question his trajectory. They had shared 6 whirlwind months coffee at midnight, cheap ramen and Mozart, her paint-stained fingers resting on his wrist while he wrote code for his first development pitch. And then he left, for Dubai, for capital, for legacy, for everything he now had. He never looked back, until tonight, 30 minutes later, Grayson pulled into the cracked parking lot of Maplewood Transitional Center. The building was squat, red brick, worn by time and weather. A flickering security light cast odd shadows against the graffiti-tagged wall. This was not a place anyone chose. It was a place life cornered you into. He sat there, engine running, staring at the glowing windows like they might burn him. What was he even doing? This could be a mistake, a scam, a trick, or it could be true. His heart kicked against his ribs, not from fear, from something worse doubt. He turned off the engine. Inside, the air smelled like old books and disinfectant. A receptionist barely glanced up from her computer until he said his name. Grayson Cole. "I received a note about someone named Nora. I believe I need to speak to your director." The receptionist blinked. One moment, minutes later, a tired woman in her 50s appeared. Her name tag read Rena Morales. Her eyes were kind, her posture exhausted. "She's been asking for you," Rena said without judgment, as though this happened all the time. "I didn't know," Grayson murmured. "She said you might not." Rena's voice softened. "Come with me." They walked down a narrow corridor lined with mismatched chairs and faded posters about trauma counseling. Grayson's polished shoes felt out of place on the dull linoleum floor. Outside a small office, Rena paused. "She's strong, but it's been a long week." Grayson didn't ask what that meant. When the door opened, he saw her. She was seated on a couch that swallowed her small frame. 9 years old, maybe 10, pale blonde curls tucked behind her ears, hands folded neatly in her lap, and her eyes grayish-blue, sharp, unflinching eyes. She stood slowly, then raised her wrist, a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark. Grayson blinked. "I'm Nora," she said. Just that. No accusations, no drama, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Grayson Cole, billionaire CEO, master of boardrooms, speaker at Global Summit, shed no words, only the hollow ache of something long lost, and maybe, just maybe, found again. Grayson Cole stood in the doorway, unable to move. The girl in front of him didn't flinch. She didn't smile either. She just watched him, like she was waiting to see if he'd run. He almost did, but instead, he stepped inside. The room was small and plain off-white walls, a dusty lamp, and a small couch with a crocheted blanket draped over the back. Nora had returned to her seat, legs crossed at the ankles, posture too straight for someone her age. She didn't fidget. She didn't play with her hands. She just watched him. "You came fast," she said. Her voice was quiet, light but deliberate. Grayson nodded slowly. "Your note? I read it." She said you might not. Who he asked, though he already knew. Grandma. Margaret. That name hit him with a sharp tug, not a memory, but a hint Eliza had mentioned her mother once, back in the early days. Margaret was kind, strong. She ran a shelter. Maybe this one. He couldn't remember. He hadn't asked many questions back then. He'd been too focused on his 5-year growth model. "How is she?" he asked. Nora's eyes dropped to her lap. She passed 3 days ago. Silence settled over the room like a heavy fog. Grayson looked away, unsure where to place his gaze. A corkboard on the wall was pinned with children's drawings. One had a dog flying through the sky with wings. Another was just swirls of dark red. None were signed. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "She said not to be, that she had a good life." Nora reached into a small backpack resting beside her and pulled out a worn envelope. "She left this for you, in case I found you." Grayson hesitated, then took the envelope. His name was written on the front in cursive, familiar but slightly shaky. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No date, no greeting. Just a few lines. "Grayson, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't expect anything from you. I just hope you'll meet her. She deserves that. Margaret." It was all it took for his breath to catch. He folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and returned it to the envelope. Then he looked at the girl, his daughter maybe. Probably. He didn't ask yet. Not tonight. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Nora shrugged. "They said maybe foster care. I've been here since before." "Before what?" She didn't answer. Just traced the seam of the couch cushion with her finger. "Ms." Morales stepped in from the hallway, gently closing the door behind her. "Mr. Cole, I imagine this is a lot to process. That would be an understatement." She nodded, compassionate but firm. "Nora's in a transitional period. There's no legal placement set yet. Her grandmother had full custody. But Eliza..." Her voice softened. Eliza never listed a secondary guardian. No formal documents beyond the birth certificate. He didn't know how to process that name being said out loud. "Eliza, she didn't tell me," he murmured. "She didn't ask for help," Morales replied, not unkindly. "She was proud. She worked. She painted. Nora was her world. That part, at least, he wasn't surprised to hear." Grayson stood still for a long moment. Then he said the words without planning to. "I want to take her home." Both Morales and Nora looked up. "Mr. Cole," Morales said carefully, "it's not that simple. There's protocol, guardianship, verification. I understand," he said, though he didn't, not entirely. "But she shouldn't be here another night. I have the means, I have the space, and the emotional readiness she asked." He paused. That one landed harder than expected. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm not walking out." Rena studied him for a long beat. Then she turned to Nora. "How do you feel about that?" The girl looked up. Her eyes scanned Grayson's face again like she was checking for cracks. "Can I bring my backpack?" she asked. His chest loosened, just a little. "Of course. And my turtle." "Definitely your turtle." She nodded once and stood. 30 minutes later, they were back in his car, headed toward the city. It was quiet. No music, no small talk, just headlights carving through the dark streets. At one stoplight, she spoke. "Do you want me?" The question shattered him. He almost missed the green light. Grayson pulled the car into the next empty parking lot, turned off the engine, and looked at her. She was staring straight ahead, like if she turned her head, she might fall apart. He spoke softly. "I didn't know about you, Nora, until tonight. I didn't even know you existed. I figured, but now that I do, I'm scared. Not of you, of failing you, of not knowing how to do this." He took a breath. "But yes, I want you. I want to try. If you'll let me." She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just gave a little nod. "Okay." Back at the penthouse, the contrast was stark. Polished marble floors, glass panels, cold lighting, a silent symphony of luxury. Nora stepped in and looked around like she'd entered a museum. "This is your house." He almost said, "It's our home," but the words felt too forced. Too soon. Yes. She didn't take off her shoes. She didn't ask where to sit. She just followed him down the hallway, her little backpack slung over one shoulder, turtle in hand. He opened the guest bedroom. It was massive, gray, impersonal, more suited for a diplomat than a child. "We'll redecorate," he said, noticing how small she looked against the king-size bed. "Tomorrow. Anything you want." She placed her backpack gently on the floor and climbed onto the edge of the mattress. "I don't need much," she said. Grayson stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. "Do you want a glass of water, something to eat?" She shook her head. "I'm okay. Thank you." He nodded. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Grayson." It hurt, but he understood. As he closed the door softly behind him, Grayson leaned against the hallway wall and finally exhaled. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, for the first time in years, his house wasn't silent, and that meant something. Something real. Something worth staying for. The next morning, Grayson woke up before dawn, not out of habit, but restlessness. He hadn't slept much. The silence in his penthouse had never bothered him before. He'd once considered it a sign of success, a space too refined for noise. But now, he found himself listening for the small sound of footsteps, for a door creaking open, for anything that might tell him Nora was still here. He got out of bed and moved through the apartment quietly, barefoot on the cool hardwood. The guest room door was closed. He didn't knock, just stood there for a moment, hand resting gently against the wall. He'd never realized how sterile his home really was. Everything in the penthouse had been curated imported art, minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the Boston skyline like a living portrait. But none of it had ever felt personal. No photos, no books with dog-eared pages, no fingerprints on the glass. It was a space designed to impress, not to live in. He made coffee, forgetting for a moment that he wasn't alone. He stood at the marble island in the kitchen, staring into the empty refrigerator, bottled water, 3 flavors of Greek yogurt, an unopened bottle of champagne, no milk, no cereal, no bread, just silence, and a growing awareness of how unprepared he really was. When he heard her footsteps, soft, hesitant, turned. Nora stood in the doorway in the same clothes she'd worn the night before. Her curls were slightly messy, and she clutched a worn stuffed turtle in one hand. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him. Then her eyes shifted to the refrigerator. "I think you forgot to feed your house," she said. It took him a second. Then he laughed a short, surprised sound. The first in a long time. "I think you're right," he replied. I'm afraid it's not used to guests." She stepped into the kitchen cautiously, glancing at the cold countertop, the oversized stools, the glass shelves filled with wine he never drank. "Do you have cereal?" she asked. He opened the cabinet. Empty. "Coffee," she added, trying to sound grown up. "That I do." He poured her a glass of water instead. "But you're not starting your day with caffeine." She took the water without protest and perched on a stool, her feet dangling high above the ground. She looked out the window at the skyline, squinting at the sun peeking over the rooftops. "Have you lived here a long time?" 7 years? Alone?" He hesitated. "Yes." She nodded, as if that answered a question she hadn't voiced. "I'm sorry about your grandmother," he said. Nora didn't look at him. She was my mom's mom. After Mom died, we moved a lot, but Grandma always tried to make it feel like one place. Grayson studied her face, so composed, so still, like she was holding something and too afraid to let it show. "I want this to feel like a place, too," he said, "even if we don't get everything right away." She finally met his eyes. "I don't need perfect." That stopped him cold. How many adults had ever said that to him in his world? Everything was built on perfection portfolios, quarterly reports, successions. But she wasn't asking for any of that. Just presence. They ended up walking to the corner cafe for breakfast. Grayson hadn't walked anywhere in months. He always used a driver, even for short distances. But Nora insisted, and he didn't argue. She ordered pancakes with strawberries. He got the same, just to be safe. They ate in a booth by the window. Grayson noticed how she separated her food into tiny sections, never letting the syrup touch the eggs. She chewed slowly, methodically, like it was a habit. "Did your mom like pancakes?" he asked. Nora smiled faintly. She liked painting food more than eating it. Grayson sipped his coffee. She was a good artist. She was more than that. He nodded. I'm sure she was. When they returned to the penthouse, Nora wandered through the rooms quietly. She didn't touch anything, but she looked at everything: bookshelves lined with unread business manuals, sculptures that looked impressive but meant nothing, walls that echoed every step. In her room, she unpacked without being asked: a few shirts, some leggings, a sketchbook, and a photo frame wrapped in a scarf. Grayson noticed the corner of the picture-a-woman's smile. Wind-blown hair, sunlight behind her. "Eliza," he said softly. Nora nodded. "She always kept this by my bed, even when we moved. Do you want to put it on the nightstand? Is it okay? It's your room now." She carefully unwrapped the photo and set it next to the lamp. The scarf fluttered slightly as she smoothed it out. That night, Grayson stared at the ceiling above his bed, unable to sleep. The city moved outside his window scars. Lights, a steady hum of life he could never quite shut out. He got up, walked to his office, and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a shoebox wrapped in rubber bands. Inside that, old notes, a faded train ticket, a napkin with a watercolor smear, and a photograph of Eliza sitting barefoot on a dock, sketchbook on her lap. She'd been laughing, head tilted back, eyes closed. He hadn't taken the picture, but he'd always kept it. He sat there a long time, remembering the sound of her voice, the way she said his name when she was angry, the way she never begged him to stay, and now she was gone. He closed the box slowly and replaced it. As he turned off the light, he heard soft footsteps. Nora stood in the doorway in pajamas that were too big. her turtle clutched under one arm. "I had a bad dream." He nodded, unsure of what to do. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head. "Do you want me to walk you back?" She shook her head again. "Do you want to sit for a bit?" She nodded. Grayson walked with her to the living room. She curled up on the couch. He sat beside her. They didn't speak. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't check his email. He just sat there, breathing in sync with the small, quiet presence next to him. After a while, her eyes drifted closed. She didn't ask him to stay, but he stayed anyway, because a penthouse wasn't a home. Not until someone wanted you to be there. Grayson didn't leave the couch that night. Nora had fallen asleep against a throw pillow, her arms wrapped tightly around the turtle. Occasionally, she murmured in her sleep fragments of words he couldn't make out. He stayed still, listening to the rhythm of her breath, realizing how unnatural the silence of his penthouse had become without her small sounds filling it. As the sky outside turned the pale blue of early morning, he moved carefully, lifting her just enough to carry her back to the guest room. She stirred, half-conscious, but didn't resist. When he laid her down on the bed and tucked the blanket around her, her hand reached for the framed photograph on the nightstand. Her fingers brushed the edge of the scarf covering Eliza's picture, then dropped back to her side. He stood there for a while, unsure what to feel. Guilt, maybe, or awe, or something older, heavier, something unspoken. In his office, the shoebox from the night before still sat on the desk, closed but waiting. He opened it again. Eliza had kept everything. Notes he scribbled on receipts, a concert ticket from a jazz club they went to on a whim, a postcard he once sent from Tokyo, unsigned, the kind you write in a hotel lobby but never expect someone to keep. Beneath all of it was a small, square sketchbook. The cover was worn at the edges, paint-streaked, corners curled from age. Grayson turned to the first page, a pencil sketch of him, asleep on her couch, still in his suit, tie loosened. She had drawn him with softened lines, not as the sharp, guarded man he saw in the mirror, but as someone at rest, at peace. He turned to the next page. It was dated 8 years ago. A hospital room, Eliza in a chair, holding something tiny against her chest. Nora. His breath caught. She had drawn their daughter's birth. He wasn't there. Another sketch. Eliza alone, sitting by a window. Another, Nora, maybe 2 years old, with curls like springs and a curious, determined face. The pages continued, Eliza reading on a porch, Nora asleep in a car seat, a birthday cake with one candle, a series of seasons winter walks, park benches, tiny boots in the snow. He reached the final page. There were no people in that one. Just a lighthouse standing alone on a cliff, waves crashing below, clouds coiling around its crown. It was haunting, beautiful, isolated. She had written one sentence beneath it, in small, deliberate script. "You always knew how to shine. Grayson, you just never learned how to stay." He closed the sketchbook slowly, feeling the weight of every page inside him. She hadn't hated him. That would have been easier. Instead, she had drawn him like someone she mourned while he was still alive. Later that morning, Nora woke up late. He made eggs burn the first batch and tried again. She sat at the island, still in pajamas, watching him like she wasn't sure what kind of man he was yet. He placed a plate in front of her. "Scrambled," he said. "I hope that's okay." She tasted a bite, then gave a small nod. "Better than Grandma's," she said. "But don't tell her I said that." He smiled at that. Your secret's safe with me. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. More like a pause between questions. Afterward, she walked over to the windows, her hands pressed to the glass. She looked out at the maze of rooftops, fire escapes, and distant parks. "Do you work in one of those buildings?" she asked. He joined her at the window, scanning the skyline, the one with the blue glass and the triangle top. "That's Coal Vest. It looks cold?" "It is. Sometimes. Do they know about me?" He looked at her. "Not yet." She nodded. "Will they be mad?" "They'll be surprised. But no, not mad." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, softly, Mom said you were building something big, that you needed space to grow it. Grayson swallowed the knot in his throat. "She told you that." Nora nodded. "She said you weren't a bad person, just someone who thought he had more time." He turned away from the window. "I'm sorry she had to raise you alone. She didn't complain." "I know," he said. "She wouldn't." Later, he asked if she wanted to go shopping for clothes, supplies, anything she needed. Nora hesitated. "We don't have to spend money. You're allowed to have things," he said gently. At the store, she stayed close to him. She picked things, practically no bright colors, no glitter, no asking for more than one of anything. In the toy aisle, she paused at an art set, watercolors, brushes, a small foldable easel. Her hand hovered, then dropped. "Do you like painting?" he asked. She shrugged. "Mom said when words are too hard, paint can say them better." He added the set to the cart without asking. Back at the penthouse, she unpacked her things with care. In the afternoon, she set up the easel by the window and began to paint in silence. Grayson watched from the hallway. Her shoulders were hunched slightly, her concentration pure. Her brush moved in slow, patient arcs. He didn't interrupt. That night, he made pasta. Overcooked it. She still said thank you. After dinner, they watched an animated movie on the couch. She sat on the far cushion at first, but by the end, she was leaning against his arm. Halfway through, she dozed off. He didn't move. He didn't want to. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and something else, something achingly familiar, like Eliza's old studio, like memory. He looked down at her sleeping face, and he thought, "I never asked to be a father," but she never asked to be left behind. That night, as he tucked her into bed, she opened her eyes briefly. "Was she mad at you?" she asked. Eliza and Nora nodded. "No," he said. "I think she forgave me a long time ago, even if I didn't deserve it." Nora rolled onto her side, holding her turtle close. "She said you'd be a good dad. Someday." He didn't reply. Couldn't. He just stood there, watching her sleep. And for the first time since Eliza walked out of his life, he let himself cry, because ghosts don't always haunt you. Sometimes they lead you home. The following week unfolded like a quiet truce between two very different worlds. In one, Grayson Cole still fielded morning reports, legal briefings, and strategy decks from his executive team. In the other, he learned how to pour milk without spilling it on the counter, how to braid a 9-year-old's hair after watching a 3-minute video tutorial, how to speak gently when a child hesitates to ask if she can draw instead of doing math worksheets. He was juggling 2 calendars now, one filled with profit margins and shareholder meetings, and another entirely unscheduled but somehow more demanding colored pencils, bedtime stories, conversations that began with Dad and ended with a question he didn't know how to answer. He hadn't told her to call him that. She did it once, tentatively, on the second morning. He froze. She noticed and quickly switched to Grayson again. He regretted not saying something, but fear got there first. At work, his assistant, Angela Kwan, had questions, most of which she kept behind a professional tone and narrowed eyes. "You've moved 3 board calls this week," she said, her tablet pressed tight against her chest. "Is this related to the personal matter you mentioned?" Grayson nodded once. "It is." She hesitated. Angela had worked for him for 6 years. She knew when to push and when not to. "Understood," she said, "but the Singapore expansion team needs a decision on travel dates. They're expecting you to be on site by the end of the month. I'll let you know by Friday." Angela gave a polite nod and left, but he saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She'd never had to guess where he stood, until now. Back at the penthouse that evening, Nora was watching a cartoon, her feet tucked beneath her sketchbook resting beside her on the couch. He paused before entering the room, watching her from the hallway. The version of himself that existed just a few weeks ago wouldn't have recognized this scene. He used to pride himself on never being home before 9. He had meals delivered, but never sat to eat them. He filled the space with sleek furniture and muted art, but never people. Now, there was a child sitting on his couch, humming quietly to herself, holding a stuffed turtle while animated animals danced across the TV screen, and somehow it all felt more real than anything he'd built. He cleared his throat. She looked up. "Hi, dinner in 10. What are we having? Grilled cheese." Her face lit up. "With tomato soup I can try." She grinned and held up a finger. "Mom said if you dip the sandwich in the soup, it's like a hug for your mouth." He almost laughed. "That sounds dangerous." "It's the best kind of dangerous." In the kitchen, he tried not to burn the bread. He failed once, then got it right. They sat at the kitchen island, eating slowly, not rushing the conversation. "Did you paint today?" he asked. She nodded. "I painted you." He blinked. "Really?" She reached under the island and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a watercolor, clearly done with care, but still the hand of a child. It showed the two of them sitting on the couch, side by side, watching TV. His arm was around her, her turtle was on her lap. Behind them, a window with stars. He looked at her. "You gave me hair." She smirked. "I thought you deserved some." He laughed and nodded. "Fair enough." She stared at him for a second, then added, more seriously, "I can make another one if you don't like it." He set the painting down carefully. "Nora, I love it." She didn't smile right away, but her shoulders relaxed. She took another bite of her sandwich, dunking it into her soup without looking up. The next morning, he walked her to school. It was only 5 blocks away. She carried her backpack, swinging it slightly as they moved down the sidewalk. It wasn't warm, but she refused a jacket, saying she liked the wind. Said it reminded her of her mother. Grayson didn't argue. Outside the school gates, she turned to him. "You don't have to walk me all the way every day. I want to." "Okay, just don't wave or anything." "No waving." "Got it." He waited until she disappeared into the building before turning back. Later that morning, at a meeting with international partners, his phone vibrated, twice, then again. Angela slipped him a note, tabloid rumor gaining traction. Personal connection. No confirmation from our side. He didn't react outwardly, but inside, a slow ripple of anxiety began. That night, after Nora had gone to sleep, he scrolled through headlines. Real estate titan's secret daughter sources say Colvest CEO may be facing custody claim. There were photos blurry, zoomed in, him walking Nora to school, him holding a shopping bag, her eating ice cream. No names, no confirmation, but the damage was done. The next day, at school, pickup, Nora got into the car quietly. He glanced at her. "Everything okay?" Madison asked if I was your secret. His jaw tightened. I said no. She added, "What else did she say?" "She said you didn't want me until Grandma died." The words landed like a punch. He pulled the car over, turned to face her fully. "I didn't know about you, Nora. That's the truth. If I had, things would have been different." How different? He paused, forcing himself not to offer a rehearsed answer. "I don't know. I can't rewrite what happened, but I can choose what I do now." She looked out the window. "Do you think I'm a problem?" The question cut deeper than he expected. "No. I think you're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." She didn't reply. But when they got home, she left her sketchbook open on the coffee table with a new painting, the two of them standing on a rooftop, looking out at a city full of lights. No words, just color, just feeling, and somehow that was enough. The next morning, Grayson woke to 26 missed messages, 3 from legal, 2 from the PR team, 1 from his head of investor relations, flagged urgent, and the rest from numbers he didn't recognize. He didn't check any of them right away. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, brewed coffee, and stood in front of the window as the city yawned open beneath him. Light crawled over rooftops. Traffic began to hum. In another life, this would have been the start of a normal day. Now, there was no such thing. When Nora came into the kitchen, she was wearing one of the new sweaters they'd picked together. She still dragged her feet a little when she was tired, rubbing at her eyes with the sleeve. He tried to act normal. "Cereal or eggs?" She hesitated. "Eggs, if it's not too much." It's never too much. He cracked the eggs into the pan. She sat at the island, swinging her feet slowly. "Do people know about me now?" she asked. The question was direct. There was no accusation in her tone, just curiosity, maybe a bit of worry tucked beneath it. Grayson turned the burner down. "Some people do. Articles came out. They didn't use your name, but they took pictures. From when we went to the store, from the cafe." Nora nodded like she'd expected it. "I don't want people to think I'm a secret," she said softly. "I didn't ask to be one." Grayson set the pan aside. "You're not to me. But you didn't tell anyone. I was trying to protect you." She looked up. Madison said secrets are usually the things people don't want. He didn't respond right away, because that sentence, it was true. Once, when the eggs were ready, he plated them without garnish or flourish, just food in front of a child. And that felt like enough. After breakfast, he walked her to school again. This time, other parents looked longer than they used to. 2 even whispered, then looked away when he caught their eyes. Nora didn't say anything until they reached the gate. "Do I still go here if people don't like me? People liking you doesn't decide where you belong." She nodded and walked inside. Back at the office, the real storm was waiting. Angela met him at the elevator. Media's doubled down. They want a statement. 2 outlets are speculating on custody status. We've gotten calls from a family law correspondent and 3 national morning shows. I said nothing public. You did, but your silence is getting loud. He walked into the boardroom where the executive team was already seated. Angela followed, closing the door behind her. Grayson scanned the room. Most faces were unreadable. A few looked quietly concerned. One or two calculating. "Our only comment," he began, "is that I'm a private individual, and my family life is not up for public speculation." "Respectfully," said Martin Thorne, head of investor strategy, "this is no longer private. You've been photographed with a child who may or may not be your daughter, and we've got stakeholders asking if your attention is compromised." Grayson didn't flinch. "My attention is fine. We have the Singapore deal closing in 3 weeks. I'm aware. You're the only one with authority to sign off on final documents. I'll be available. You're scheduled to travel. I'm reconsidering that." A beat of silence followed. Angela spoke next. "If the media narrative continues, we could see reputational drag on upcoming partnerships." Grayson leaned back in his chair. "If anyone's unsure whether I can balance business and fatherhood, now is a good time to say it." No one did. But the air shifted. That evening, when he picked up Nora, she was quieter than usual. Her hands stayed in her lap. Her backpack looked heavier than it should have. He waited until they were home and she'd changed into sweatpants before he asked, "What happened today?" "Nothing." "Nora?" She looked up, the shield cracking just enough to let the truth through. "Someone said, I'm only here because you feel guilty." Grayson didn't move. "Who said that I don't know her name? She was talking to Madison. And what did you say? I didn't say anything." "Do you want to?" Nora stared at her shoes. "Doesn't matter what I say. People already believe what they want." Grayson crouched in front of her. "That's true, but I care what you say." "I didn't ask you to fix it," she whispered. "I know." He paused, then added, "But I'd still like to." That night, she drew a picture again. This one was different. No skyline, no buildings. It showed 2 figures in a boat, floating under a cloudy sky. One was small, curled up under a blanket. The other was rowing. When she handed it to him, she said, "It's us. You're rowing. I'm just trying to stay dry." He stared at the paper for a long time. "You're more than just staying dry," he said. "You're teaching me how to row." She didn't respond, but she didn't take the picture back either. Later that night, he sat in his office long after Nora had gone to bed. The media pressure was mounting. Emails pinged. Calls came in. His legal team was asking if he wanted to file for a gag order. He didn't answer them. Instead, he opened the sketchbook Eliza had left behind. He turned again to the lighthouse drawing. "You always knew how to shine. You just never learned how to stay." The next morning, he let Angela know that he was postponing the Singapore trip by 1 week. "You'll catch heat for that," she said. "I already am. And the board, they'll survive." He walked Nora to school. Same gait, same whispers, but this time he bent down before she went in. "If anyone asks," he said, "tell them I didn't find you because I was ashamed. Why then? Because I was lost." She thought about that for a moment. Then, for the first time since she moved in, she reached for his hand. She held it for only a second. But in that second, something shifted. Something real. Something that couldn't be twisted into a headline. 3 days later, the weight of 2 worlds finally collided. Grayson sat alone in his office, the skyline of Boston glittering outside the glass behind him. It was nearly midnight. His team had gone home hours ago, but he hadn't moved. The final contract for the Singapore expansion sat untouched on his desk. A digital countdown ticked silently in the corner of his screen, 3 days until the closing deadline. His phone buzzed with a message from Angela. Singapore expects your arrival on Friday. Car and flight already arranged. He didn't reply. Instead, he turned in his chair and looked out the window. Below him, the city moved like it always did, indifferent to his indecision. Nora was asleep at home, her newest drawing pinned to the fridge. It was a portrait of their kitchen, messy with pancakes and fruit, a smiley face drawn on his coffee mug. He'd found it waiting for him that morning, taped beside the grocery list they wrote together. He could still hear her voice. "I think we need more blueberries next time." The memory made his chest tighten. For a man who had spent most of his adult life controlling outcomes, who had prided himself on outmaneuvering rivals, anticipating shifts in markets, and never making a move without being 5 steps ahead, this feeling of uncertainty was something else entirely. This wasn't a market fluctuation. This was a child. This was a choice. And the truth was, Grayson didn't know how to win both. The Singapore deal had been years in the making. It would double Colvest's international footprint, make them a major global force. His board was depending on him. Investors had cleared space in their portfolios. Entire departments had staked their future growth on this move. But the art show was Friday. Nora had mentioned it once, shyly, over dinner. "They picked my painting for the showcase," she said, trying to sound casual, like it wasn't the biggest thing that had happened to her all year. He'd marked it on his calendar without a second thought. It was only later that he realized the clash-her big moment and the company's expansion deadline, crashing into the same afternoon. Now he had 3 days left to decide which room he'd be standing in. His phone buzzed again. A different message this time. From Angela. "The board would like an early confirmation that you'll be on that plane." He didn't answer. The next morning, he dropped Nora off at school. She wore a navy blue dress with a little silver star pin, something she said Eliza had worn when she was a kid. "You okay?" he asked as they reached the front gate. She hesitated. "I think I might mess up my speech." "You won't. What if I do? Then we'll celebrate anyway." She smiled, unsure, then slipped through the doors. At the office, Angela was waiting. "They're pushing harder. The chairman wants a call this afternoon. Singapore has a welcome dinner planned. If you're not there by Friday night, they'll consider it a breach." "A breach?" Grayson asked. Angela nodded. "Technically, yes. The clauses are tight." "What about delegating? They'll see it as a snub." He sat down heavily. Angela lowered her voice. "You've never asked for time before. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they won't. You could miss the art show." He looked at her. "I could." She waited, but he didn't say more. Later that day, Nora found him in the kitchen, her backpack still half-zipped. "I have to practice my speech," she said, sliding her sketch pad onto the island. "Miss Peterson said we should ask someone to listen, but it can't be a friend. It has to be a grown-up." He put his phone face down. "I qualify." She took a breath. "Okay." She opened the sketch pad. It was filled with soft color tones and thin brush lines, a lighthouse on a rocky cliff, surrounded by waves and storm clouds, but lit from within. "This is my painting," she said, her voice steady. "I painted it because my mom once told me that some people are like lighthouses. They don't chase storms. They just stand still and shine." She said my dad was like that, even if I didn't know him yet. Grayson didn't breathe. I think she meant it as a good thing, Nora said, uncertain. But I always wondered, if lighthouses don't move, how do they ever find people? He stood there, caught in the quiet pain of her question. When she finished, he said softly, "You were incredible. Really?" He nodded. "Really?" She smiled, full smile, the kind she didn't give easily, and it nearly broke him. That night, he sat at the dining table long after Nora had gone to bed. Her painting sat beside him. He hadn't dared frame it yet. It felt like it needed to earn its place. He opened his laptop, pulled up the Singapore itinerary, then closed it again. On Thursday, during a board call, he finally spoke. "I will not be in Singapore Friday," he said, voice calm, measured. The silence that followed was thick. "You're missing the final signing?" asked Walter Morgan, the chairman. "After 3 years of negotiations?" "Yes. Do you understand what's at stake?" "I do." "Then why?" "Because I have a daughter now," Grayson said, "and she has an art show. She'll only have one first showcase, and she asked me to be there." Another pause. Someone scoffed quietly. Walter cleared his throat. "We're not running a daycare." "Grayson?" "No." Grayson agreed. "You're running a company, and I'm still the one leading it, but I won't trade her for one more deal." "We'll revisit this tomorrow," Walter said. "You've still got a few hours left to come to your senses." Grayson ended the call without another word. He sat back in his chair and stared at the city lights. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't care how many floors they reached, because for once, he wasn't trying to rise. He was learning how to stay grounded. How to stay. Friday morning arrived quietly, but tension buzzed beneath the surface like static in the air. Grayson stood in the kitchen in his white shirt, sleeves rolled, carefully slicing strawberries for Nora's breakfast. She had a small bowl of oatmeal beside her, stirring it slowly, eyes still half-lidded from sleep. Her painting was carefully wrapped and leaning against the wall near the door, waiting for the art show. "You ready?" he asked gently. She nodded without looking up. "Nervous a little." He leaned on the counter. "You know what I do when I'm nervous?" She glanced up. "What I pretend I've done it before, like it's not my first time at all." She smiled faintly. "Even if it is, especially if it is." After breakfast, she went to get dressed. He checked his phone once. There were 7 new messages from the board, 2 voicemails from Singapore. Angela had sent an update. "They're furious, but we'll deal with it." He didn't respond. Instead, he put his phone face down and turned off notifications. Today wasn't for them. Today was hers. They arrived early at the school gymnasium, which had been transformed into a makeshift gallery. Art from students across all grades lined the walls, clipped onto strings of twine or placed on easels. There were clay sculptures, bright abstract pieces, portraits of dogs and families and flowers. But one piece stood out: the lighthouse. Nora's painting had been chosen to open the exhibit. Her name was on a placard in front of it, printed carefully in serif font Nora Moreno. Grade 4. Grayson stared at it with a strange tightness in his chest. The brushwork wasn't professional, but it had heart, and it told a story: storm clouds, a glowing light, and a little boat sailing toward safety. Just like them. Parents milled about. Teachers clapped softly. Kids tugged at their sleeves to show off their work. But Grayson stood still, watching Nora greet her teacher, watching her bow slightly when someone complimented her painting. She wasn't loud, but she was proud. That mattered more. He'd made the right choice. At least, he thought so. Until he got home. A man in a dark suit was waiting in the lobby. Mr. Cole Grayson nodded. The man handed him a sealed envelope. "You've been served." He blinked. "Excuse me." The man didn't elaborate, just turned and left. Grayson opened the envelope slowly as the elevator rose. Inside were legal documents, a custody challenge, filed by Eliza Moreno's sister, Madeline Carter. He sank onto the living room couch as the words blurred. Petition for legal guardianship, basis questionable fitness due to sudden assumption of care, media scrutiny, emotional instability of child. He stared at the signature, Madeline Carter. He had never met her. She and Eliza had been estranged. According to Eliza's journal, they hadn't spoken in 5 years. But she had resurfaced now, weeks after Eliza's death, just as the world began to acknowledge Nora as his. He read every line. Twice. There was no mistaking it. She was petitioning to take Nora, and she might win. Nora came out of her room wearing mismatched socks and holding her art show ribbon. "I got this for being brave," she announced, waving it gently. Grayson stood slowly, forcing his voice to stay steady. "That's amazing." She smiled. "You're going to hang it on the fridge. Right next to your lighthouse." He waited until she was asleep that night before calling Angela. "I need a recommendation," he said. "Family law attorney. Quiet, brilliant." Angela didn't ask why. She just sent 3 names within the hour. The next morning, Grayson sat with Nora at the kitchen table. She was drawing again, this time a small dog with a crooked smile. "I think he's the kind that gets adopted last," she said. "But then turns out to be the best one." He tried to keep his face neutral. "Nora," he began, "do you remember your Aunt Madeline?" She paused. "She used to yell a lot. Mom didn't like her." "Well," he said carefully, "she's trying to see if you can live with her." Nora's pencil stopped moving. "Why, I don't know. Maybe she thinks it's what your mom would have wanted. She never even visited." She whispered, "I know. Do you want me to live with her?" His heart twisted. "No, I want you right here. But what if she wins?" He couldn't lie. "Then we'll fight." Nora looked up. "Even if she says bad things about you, even then," her voice cracked. "I don't want to go." He reached across the table, holding her hand. "You won't. I'll make sure of it." And he meant it, even if it meant risking everything else. That night, he opened Eliza's sketchbook again. Near the back was a note scribbled in uneven handwriting. "If you're reading this, then you found her. Don't let anyone tell you you're too late. You're just in time." The next day, he met with Abigail Sloan, a family law specialist with 30 years of experience. She listened carefully as he explained everything. The surprise, the time they'd spent together, the media storm, the court filing. "You've done remarkably well," she said, shuffling her notes, "but it's not enough." "What do you mean? Biological connection doesn't guarantee custody. You'll need to show intent, stability, prior planning. Right now, you've got affection and sincerity. That's good, but it's not a legal plan. I'll make one. You'll also need to prepare for scrutiny. They'll dig into your past, business decisions, interviews, ex-relationships. If there's even a whisper of impropriety, they'll use it. I've been private, then someone else will speak for you." Grayson inhaled slowly. "She's not safe with Madeline." Abigail nodded. Then we fight, and they did. By Monday, the petition had been countered. A court date was set. Grayson didn't tell Nora, not yet. She had enough to carry. Instead, they kept living quiet breakfasts, sketchbook updates, shared late-night movies where she fell asleep halfway through and he carried her to bed. But every time she hugged him or said goodnight, Dad. He felt the weight of time tightening. This wasn't about corporate deals anymore. This was about proving to the world what he already knew in his bones, that she was his. Not by biology, not by blood alone, but by choice, by love, by the way she had changed him, by the way she had saved him, and he wasn't letting go. The courtroom smelled like old books and floor polish. Grayson sat stiffly in the front row of the wooden bench, his suit too tight around the shoulders. Abigail Sloane sat beside him, a quiet pillar of control in a navy blue blazer, papers stacked neatly on her lap. Across the aisle, Madeline Carter didn't look up. Her lips were pursed, her suit too pristine, her eyes sharp. She had brought a lawyer of her own, young, aggressive, the kind who mistook volume for strategy. Nora wasn't there. Grayson had insisted she stay home, sketchbook in hand, with a trusted friend of Abigail's who worked with children in high-stakes custody cases, someone soft-spoken, someone gentle, someone who wouldn't let her feel the storm happening in her name. The judge entered, an older woman with eyes that had seen too many broken families and still hadn't stopped hoping. Her nameplate read Hahn, Celia Harmon. The gavel tapped, not too loud, not theatrical, just enough to draw breath from the room. We are here to review the custody petition filed by Ms. Madeline Carter and the counter-petition from Mr. Grayson Cole, she said. Let's begin. Grayson had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but nothing prepares you for being on trial for the right to love your child. Madeline's lawyer went first, citing concerns about Nora's sudden move, media exposure, Grayson's absence for 9 years, and what he called questionable decision-making patterns. He painted a picture of a man too focused on empire to understand nurture. He did not attend her birth. He did not provide for her childhood. He did not check on her health, her welfare, or her education until her mother's death forced his hand. Grayson clenched his jaw. Then Abigail stood and calmly began to paint the real picture. She detailed how Eliza Moreno had made every effort to shield her child, how Grayson had been unaware, not neglectful, not indifferent. She submitted Eliza's handwritten letters, journal entries, text records never sent but found on her old device. They all spoke of one thing: regret, fear, hope, and a desperate wish for Grayson to find Nora when she no longer could. Then she rested her hand gently on the manila folder beside her. "Your Honor," she said, "we would also like to submit personal testimony from Miss Nora Moreno, recorded confidentially and in the presence of a licensed child counselor." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Has it been authenticated?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Proceed." Abigail hit play. Grayson held his breath. Nora's voice filled the room, soft and clear. "My name is Nora. I'm 9 years old, and I live with Grayson now. I didn't know him before, but I know him now. He makes me eggs the way I like. He doesn't laugh when I draw weird animals. He reads the labels on my shampoo to make sure they don't sting, and he asks questions, like real ones. A pause. Then I think love isn't about being there first. I think it's about being there now." Grayson's eyes welled, but he kept them open. "I don't know what will happen," she added, "but I want to stay. because for the first time, someone stayed for me." The room went quiet. The judge looked up slowly, meeting Grayson's eyes. "Thank you," she said. Court adjourned for the day. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. Leaves skittered across the pavement. Grayson didn't speak as he walked toward the car, Abigail beside him. When they were inside, he turned to her. "Did I do enough?" "You didn't have to be perfect," she said. "You just had to be honest." That night, he told Nora she didn't need to draw anything for a while if she didn't want to, that it was okay not to have something ready, that her feelings were enough. But she shook her head. "I already drew today." She handed him the paper. It was a courtroom sketch, but not of the judge or the lawyers or the long bench. It was a sketch of two figures sitting side by side, a girl with her hand on a man's, and a man trying not to cry. Above it, she'd written, "I didn't lose anything. I found someone." He framed it before bedtime. The next morning, Judge Harmon requested a private meeting with both parties. No attorneys. Grayson stepped into her chamber, heart pounding. Madeline was already there, arms crossed. The judge motioned for them both to sit. "I've reviewed the testimony," she began, "the evidence, the letters, and, most importantly, the voice of a child. Neither of them spoke. Ms. Carter, your concern for your niece is noted, but absence does not automatically disqualify a man from becoming a father, especially when the absence was not by choice." Madeline opened her mouth, but the judge raised a hand. "I'm not done." She turned to Grayson. "And you've built a world out of steel and control. You're not used to having your heart questioned, but that's what parenting is letting it be questioned, every day." Grayson nodded. The judge leaned back. "This court will grant full temporary custody to Mr. Cole, pending finalization and post-placement review. A 6-month check-in will be required. A counselor will monitor Nora's adjustment." Grayson inhaled sharply. Madeline stood. "You're choosing an executive over blood." "I'm choosing the person who stayed," the judge replied. That night, when he told Nora, she didn't cry. She just nodded, quietly, and said, "Okay." Then she climbed into his lap and laid her head on his shoulder. "You're not just a lighthouse," she murmured. "You're the boat, too." Grayson didn't answer, because sometimes the words weren't big enough. Sometimes all you could do was hold on. The world didn't change after the court ruling, not in the way people expect it to. No fireworks, no headlines, no dramatic music. Just a quiet Tuesday morning, a light breeze coming through the apartment window, and the smell of toast. But for Grayson and Nora, everything had changed. She sat at the kitchen table, humming softly, drawing with her usual focus tongue between her teeth, shoulders gently hunched. Her hoodie sleeves were pulled over her hands. It was her new favorite navy blue, with a faded constellation print on the back. Grayson poured coffee and watched her for a moment before asking, "What's the sketch today?" She looked up, not done yet. "Can I see?" She tilted it toward him briefly. It was a house, small, with warm yellow lights in the windows and what looked like waves of sound-like laughter coming from inside. A family stood at the door. One tall figure, one small. "I think it's what I want us to feel like," she said, as if it wasn't a profound thing to say. "Not just be like, feel like." He paused. That makes sense. He didn't tell her he'd been searching houses in quieter neighborhoods, near good schools, with gardens, with light. Later that night, after she was asleep, He returned to the sketchbook Eliza had left behind. There was one envelope at the back he hadn't dared open until now. It was marked, "Only when she's safe." His fingers hesitated. Then he slid the flap open. Inside, folded neatly, was a letter addressed to Nora. "Dear Nora, if you're reading this, it means the storm has passed. Or maybe it's just begun. But either way, you're not alone. That matters most. I don't know what the world will look like when this finds you. Maybe you're 9. Maybe you're 29. I hope you're loved. I hope you're still drawing. You always had that in you, the ability to see what others miss. There are some truths I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Not because they were shameful, but because they were heavy. And I wanted your childhood to be light. Even if mine wasn't, you deserve to know your father didn't leave you. He never knew you existed. I was scared, not of him, of what the world would do to a child who was born from an unfinished story. I didn't want you to be a footnote in someone else's empire. But I was wrong. You're not a footnote. You're the rewrite. You are the light I never found in myself. The chapter I never finished. The truth I was always trying to draw. If he's with you now, it means he chose you. And I trust that. Because I never stopped believing in the man I once knew, the one who carried too much silence, but always saw the bigger picture. Let yourself love him. Let him earn your love. And let yourself be loved back. You're not hard to love. Nora, you're just rare. Like lighthouses, like stars, like girls who remember what others forget. Mom Grayson didn't move for a long time. He sat with the letter in his lap, elbows on the kitchen counter, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound around him. It wasn't guilt he felt. It was awe. Eliza had trusted him even in death, had believed he would show up, even years later, had left him the one thing he could never earn but could fiercely protect, her legacy, their daughter. That weekend, they visited Eliza's grave. Nora held a single sunflower. She didn't cry. She just crouched down and gently placed the flower on the grass. "I got the ribbon," she whispered, "and I didn't run off stage." Grayson stood behind her, hands in his coat pockets. "I think she would have been proud," he said. Nora looked up at him. "She was right, you know, about what you're better at staying than chasing." He nodded, and she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote something. Want to read it?" She shook her head. "Can you?" Grayson knelt and took the page. The handwriting was large and a little uneven, but every word was spelled with care. "Dear Mom, I didn't forget you. I won't. But I also found someone. He doesn't know everything, but he tries. He doesn't fix all the bad things, but he stays when they happen. He makes pancakes. He lets me fall asleep first during movies. He asks what I dream about, and he keeps the lighthouse picture in his office now. So I think I'm safe, and I think you would have liked him. I think you already did. Love." Nora Grayson folded the letter and tucked it into the earth, just beneath the sunflower. They stood in silence for a while, and then, walking back to the car, Nora slipped her hand into his. That night, Grayson returned to his office at Colvest for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Angela was waiting at his desk, files in hand. I moved the Singapore deal to the deputy lead. She said, "He's terrified, but eager." Grayson nodded. "Good." She raised an eyebrow. "You okay? I think so." Angela hesitated. "You know, when you disappeared, some of the partners were talking. They said maybe you'd lost focus. Maybe the old Grayson was gone. He smiled faintly. He is. She blinked. I found something better, he said. He opened a drawer and slid out a new frame. It was Nora's drawing, the courtroom sketch. Angela studied it. You're keeping it here. He nodded. This is the only win that matters. That weekend, they painted Nora's new bedroom together. She picked a soft lavender for the walls and hung stars from the ceiling. Grayson let her draw on one entire corner with chalk. I want it to change whenever I feel something, she said. By Monday, it had 3 doodles, a lighthouse, a little girl with a big smile, and a boat with a tall sail. He added a 4th, a coffee mug with a smiley face. You remembered, she whispered, always. The days grew longer, their routines grew quieter, but their world had color now, not because it had no darkness, but because they had lot inside it, together. The first time Grayson walked into the parent-teacher conference at Nora's school, he felt more nervous than he had in any boardroom. He wore a blazer and no tie, trying not to look too formal, but the other parents still gave him curious glances. Some recognized him, Grayson Cole, the elusive CEO whose face rarely appeared in the press but whose decisions moved markets. But here, none of that mattered. Here, he was just a father. He sat in the tiny plastic chair across from Miss Peterson, Nora's teacher. The walls were covered in student artwork, seasonal poems, and a chart that read, How We're Feeling Today, with clothespins next to emojis. Grayson noticed Nora's pin was next to the little yellow face with a gentle smile. He exhaled. Miss Peterson was warm, perceptive. She spoke with her hands and leaned in like she wanted you to know she was listening with her whole body. Nora's doing well, she began, flipping open a folder. Her reading comprehension is excellent. Her art continues to reflect deep emotional insight. She started participating more, raising her hand. And she's made 2 new friends. Grayson smiled. She mentioned one of them draws dragons. Lucy, they're quite the duo. But then Miss Peterson paused. There's one thing I'd like to bring up. Grayson sat straighter. Of course. She turned the folder around and showed him a series of worksheets. On each one, Nora had drawn a small image in the corner. Always the same, a chair, empty, sometimes in a classroom, sometimes next to a bed, sometimes by a window. She doesn't speak much about her mother in class, Miss Peterson said gently, but I believe this is her way of expressing grief. Grayson nodded slowly, the weight of the image settling in his chest. She told me once, he said softly, that her mom used to sit with her while she drew, even if she didn't say anything. Just stayed in the chair. Miss Peterson smiled sadly. Then it's a memory she's keeping close. That night, he asked Nora about the chair. They were brushing their teeth side by side, mirror fogged from the shower she insisted on taking with too much steam. Hey, he said between toothpaste bubbles, I saw the drawings at school. She didn't answer right away. I like chairs, she mumbled. They wait, even when people don't. He bent down slightly to meet her eyes in the mirror. Do you want to talk about it? I just don't want to forget. You won't, he said. But if you ever want to remember out loud, I'll listen. Later, after she fell asleep, he went online and ordered a simple wooden chair, oak, like the one in Eliza's old apartment, the one she used to sit in while watching Nora draw. When it arrived, he placed it in the corner of Nora's room. No words, no big reveal, just presence. That weekend, the school held a spring fair. Nora insisted they attend. She wore her favorite overalls and insisted he let her paint a star on his cheek. He didn't protest. She also made him play the ring toss 3 times in a row, and he managed to win her a plush turtle. "This one's for Turtle's cousin," she said, grinning. They shared cotton candy, took a picture in the photo booth, and then, in one quiet moment, Grayson spotted something at the Wish Tree Station. Kids could write a wish on a ribbon and tie it to the branches of a paper tree on the wall. Nora stood for a long time with her marker, thinking. Then she tied her ribbon gently and walked away. He approached after she'd joined the face-painting line. Her ribbon was light blue, and it read, "I wish the chair stays full now." He blinked fast. That night, she was unusually quiet at dinner. "Something on your mind?" he asked. She shrugged, "Just thinking." "About?" She hesitated. "Then you're not going to disappear, are you?" The question hit him in the chest. He set his fork down. "No, sweetheart, I'm not. But what if the job takes you far away again?" "It won't. Not like before." She chewed her lip. "Even if you miss something big, I'll be there." She looked at him carefully. "Promise, I swear." He meant it with everything he had, but that promise was tested sooner than he expected. 3 days later, Colvest called an emergency board meeting. A major investor was threatening to pull out. The markets were reacting. His presence was strongly advised in Zurich. Angela called, apologetic. "They're framing it as existential," she said. "If you don't come, they're threatening to force a vote of leadership." Grayson stood at the window, watching Nora draw in the living room. He thought of the chair. He thought of Eliza's letter. He thought of every morning he'd packed lunch, every drawing he'd hung on the fridge, every good night. Dad whispered at the door, and, for the first time in 20 years, he said no. "Tell them," he said calmly, "I won't be attending." Angela was quiet. "They'll come for your seat. Let them." He hung up. That night, he made spaghetti with too much garlic, and Nora laughed at his sneezes. They watched an animated movie with talking animals. She fell asleep midway, her head on his shoulder, breathing slow and soft. The next morning, he opened his email. The board had indeed voted. They had called his refusal a lack of strategic focus, and asked for his resignation. Grayson stared at the message for a moment. Then he wrote 2 sentences in reply. "I understand. My priorities have changed. I wish you all well." Then he closed the laptop and opened a fresh sketchbook Nora had left on the table. He wrote on the first page, "This page is for what we build next. Together." She found it later and smiled. "You're starting to draw. Only if you teach me," he said. She nodded, solemn as a teacher. "I will, but no drawing chairs for a while. We're filling them now," and they were. The apartment looked different now. Not because Grayson had remodeled it, but because it felt lived in. There were paper stars taped to the hallway walls, magnets shaped like vegetables on the fridge, and a small easel in the corner of the living room where Nora liked to paint when the sun hit just right. It was no longer a place to come back to after long absences. It was home. Grayson had traded early morning investor calls for school drop-offs. He no longer read profit and loss sheets at night, but bedtime stories, sometimes the same one 3 nights in a row. Nora said he gave the best grandpa voices for old characters. Sometimes he missed the precision of the boardroom, the sharpness, the structure. But then he'd hear Nora humming in the next room, or feel her arms wrap around him unexpectedly, and he knew he hadn't lost anything. He had simply traded it in for something infinitely more valuable. One afternoon, she came home from school unusually quiet. She dropped her backpack at the door, skipped her usual snack routine, and walked straight to her easel. Grayson watched as she stood there for several minutes, not drawing, not moving, just thinking. He didn't interrupt. Instead, he went to the kitchen and began chopping vegetables for dinner, waiting for her silence to speak. Eventually, it did. Daddy. It still startled him, that word. He turned. Yeah, do you think Mom would have come to my art show? He dried his hands with a dish towel. Absolutely. Even if my drawings weren't perfect, she would have especially come if they weren't perfect. Nora nodded thoughtfully, then went back to her sketch. That Friday was the school's spring art exhibition. Parents were invited to view the students' work displayed in the gymnasium. Grayson arrived early, wearing a button-down shirt Nora had chosen for him, light blue, with tiny stars on the cuffs. He stood in front of Nora's display, heart swelling. Each drawing told a story. One was titled Things I Thought I Lost. It featured a girl holding a thread tied to a balloon in the shape of a heart. Another was called When Quiet Feels Like Lava, drawing of a kitchen, a chair, and a steaming mug left waiting. But the final drawing centered, framed, and marked with a gold star was different. It was called The Last Sketch. It showed a hand sketching a lighthouse, but in this version, the lighthouse was holding a lantern that glowed so brightly it lit up a boat sailing in the distance. Inside the boat were two figures, one tall, one small, both smiling. Grayson stared at it longer than he meant to. He didn't hear the crowd around him or the praise from other parents. All he could think about was the girl who had once drawn empty chairs and now drew light. After the show, they walked home slowly. The sky was streaked in pink, the air warm. I saw people crying. Nora said, "Was that because of my drawing? Maybe?" Grayson replied, "Sometimes when something feels true, it touches places we didn't know were waiting." She was quiet for a few moments. "Then I want to send one of the drawings to the children's hospital. Maybe the balloon one. Do you think it would help someone? I think it already is. At home, they had popcorn for dinner and built a pillow fort in the living room. Inside it..." Nora read aloud from her favorite book, pausing now and then to make up new endings. "Wouldn't it be cool," she said. If the dragon turned into a music teacher, Grayson laughed. That would be a twist. When she finally fell asleep, curled against his side, her sketchbook open beside her, Grayson sat still for a long time, listening to her breathe, and then he pulled out a pen and wrote something in the back of the sketchbook. To Nora, "You didn't just fill the chair. You taught me how to sit still in it. Love, Dad." The next morning, they visited the old lighthouse on the edge of the city. It had reopened as a community arts center, and Nora had been invited to hang one of her pieces in the children's gallery. She chose The Last Sketch. As they walked the winding path toward the tower, she reached for his hand. "You ever been inside a lighthouse before?" she asked. He shook his head. Nope, but I think it'll feel like climbing into a star." They reached the top, breathless and laughing. The city sprawled below them. The sea shimmered. Grayson looked out, then down at her. "I don't think I ever told you this," he said, "but the day I first saw you, in that restaurant, you wrote something on a napkin." She giggled. "I remember. I kept it." Still, he nodded, Still, what did it say again? He reached into his pocket and pulled it out. The ink had faded, but the words were still there. "You look like someone who needs to remember something." She looked at him with wide eyes. "Well," he said, "I remembered." She smiled. "Me too." And for a moment, in the lighthouse, surrounded by the echo of seagulls and sunlight dancing on waves, there was no grief, no loss, no past to outrun. There was only now, and in that now, a chair no longer sat empty. A lighthouse no longer stood alone, and a man who had once led empires finally understood the quiet, brilliant power of presence, the kind of presence that doesn't need to fix, or speak, or impress. Just stay. Sometimes, the most powerful transformations come not with grand gestures but with a child's drawing, a silent chair, or a forgotten letter. Grayson didn't set out to become a father. He didn't even know he was one. But in choosing to stay, in choosing to see the child in front of him instead of the boardroom behind him, he became something far more than a CEO. And Nora, she didn't need wealth or legacy. She needed what every child deserves: someone who doesn't leave when things get quiet, someone who stays through the hard parts, someone who learns to sit in the chair. This story isn't just about grief or reunion. It's about what it means to choose love after silence, to rewrite endings we thought were final, and to build new beginnings from broken truths. In a world that often rushes past the quiet moments, this story reminds us to stop, to listen, to stay. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And join us next time as we continue to uncover stories of quiet power, unexpected love, and second chances that change everything. Your support helps us tell the stories that matter.